the legacy fencing. That's what they call it. It's the older stuff. I don't know exactly when it was built. But as you can see, it's been around for 10, 20 years, something like that. But this is the stuff that's the landing mat. These are the landing mats that are Army surplus, used for landing aircraft in
Are these radioactive?
war zones. I don't think that they'd be very radioactive, honestly, but I couldn't say one way or the other.
Don't get too close.
As we go along, you'll see numbers on the wall, and you'll see emblems. The emblems are usually that of the Army group that either built the wall or designed it. And the numbers tend to be used by the Border Patrol cameras when they're looking around, so that they know which direction they're looking, or so that they can give their agents a sort of a benchmark of where it is that they're looking and where they need to go.
So who built this wall? Was it the Army Corps of Engineers?
The Army Corps of Engineers has had a hand in designing all of the wall, but the actual construction of some of these older walls, like this one, was done, if I'm not mistaken, by the Army. I don't know what branch. Ever since 2006, the vast majority, if not all of the walls built, which is most of the walls that we have now, were built by private contractors who got somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $7 million per mile for construction of that infrastructure.
You know what, I remember something about the contractors were employing Mexican labor to build these walls.
Yeah, I've heard those rumors too. I don't know. I'm not a real expert on all that stuff.
Isn't there an Israeli company that builds walls in Palestine?
Elbit Systems is an Israeli military contractor that had a hand in construction of the apartheid wall in Israel-Palestine, and they are also a contractor for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, but they have done mostly camera systems for Department of Homeland Security in the United States. So we're stopping here. This is the new section of so-called secondary fencing. This is the second layer of border wall, and it goes about a quarter of a mile down to the port of entry. You can see the flag in the building there in the distance. That is where you can officially cross the border back and forth. If anyone brought your passport, you can feel free to go check out Naco, Sonora. Then the secondary fencing continues. It continues 2 walls like this for another quarter mile past the port of entry. And so we have a total of a little more than a half mile of double layer border wall here. And the reason we don't like to see this is because one layer of wall is bad enough. No wildlife, no water is going to get through this layer right here. So you might think, well, what's the harm in putting a second layer then, environmentally speaking? Well, the more we harden these barriers, the farther we get away from having any sort of mitigation program, any sort of wildlife-friendly structure. For example, we're trying to get Border Patrol to install vehicle barriers instead of pedestrian fencing at low water crossings here in this area when they replace this wall. If there's another wall that looks like this just past it, it doesn't matter if we let the wildlife and the water through the first layer, if it's just going to come up against a second layer and be blocked there. So the hardening of the border is bad news for our local community, and it's bad news for wildlife and for the environment. And we were very disappointed when we saw this being, the way we found out about this construction project, this secondary fencing right here, was from locals. Locals on the ground saw the construction, wanted to know what was going on, and called us, and sent us pictures. And we have this relationship with Border Patrol, but it's not very good apparently, because they don't give us a heads up about this type of thing. They just sort of install it and leave us to clean up the mess and try to figure out what's happening.
And are these lights that are on, or all cameras, or combinations?
Lights.
These are lights. This area of the border is lit up.
I thought there was something coming up.
That's the Mexican train that you're hearing on the other side.
You can hear the train. Yeah. Sometimes on a windy day like this, you'll hear a lot of noise actually made by the wall as well as the wind whistles through it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, you're seeing lights here down at the at the end of this road, you see a tower. That's a camera tower. They're watching us right now. These lights continue. Oh, I don't know. I'd have to look it up, but about a mile that way, about a mile that way. The idea is to stop people from crossing through here at night. Again, we don't think it works very well. The locals tell us that basically Border Patrol is sort of blinded by the lights because they have their night vision cameras and whatnot, but if someone does run through here, as soon as they get into the dark, you can't see them anymore. Your night vision equipment's not going to work here, and your eyes aren't going to work in the dark. So, I don't know, it's all very questionable. The problem is we just keep going through this same cycle where we're just trying to put more lights, more sensors, more agents, more guns, more vehicles, more walls, more barriers, and the root causes are not being addressed. Why are people crossing the border? That's what we need to address. So this is kind of stop one on the journey. I wanted to travel this way for several miles, maybe to the top of that hill, to look at a good chunk of this primary fencing here that is slated to be reconstructed. And I personally haven't even seen it yet. I've only been to maybe 3 or 4 low water crossings this way. So this will be new territory for me, and I might stop to take some pictures and whatnot. But basically about 1 mile that way to 6 miles that way is all designated to be rebuilt with an even taller structure that I showed you the picture of. It's these bollards, these posts about 4 inches apart, about 6 inches wide. They're square, they're steel, they're filled with concrete, and there are steel plates welded to the top to try to make them harder to climb.
More like Nogales downtown?
It'll look just like Nogales, exactly. This project's not yet funded. When and if it does get funded, it would be a priority that the vehicle barriers be at the low water crossings so that wildlife and water can get through there. Unfortunately, that's not in the Border Patrol's plan right now. Their plan calls for those floodgates that require heavy equipment to open. And we've seen those floodgates fail time and time again and cause flooding in dry Arizona, you know? So. And Elna asked me to talk a little bit about some of the wildlife species. I want to talk about the jaguar. You see the San Jose Mountains behind you. I mean, those are ponderosa pine forests at the top of that, over there in northern Sonora. And also in northern Sonora is, and I think it's in Sonora, I'm pretty sure it's not across the line to Chihuahua, there's the Northern Jaguar Preserve, which is in Sonora. There is the Rancho El Aribabi in Sonora. There are various places where breeding populations of wild jaguar exist within roaming distance to where we're standing now. And that's why we have seen pictures of jaguar in the Whetstone Mountains, just north of the Huachuca Mountains in Arizona, because they roam literally hundreds of miles. And it's just such an emblematic species of why this wall is problematic. Because now the jaguar cannot come through all the way, actually it can, but from the Huachuca Mountains to where we're standing, and then all the way to Douglas, another what, 10, 15 miles? The only place the jaguar could cross would be at the San Pedro River where you can't really see actually. But the San Pedro River has vehicle barriers where the jaguar could cross. And that's why we're asking for Border Patrol, while they're doing this, is to make more of those vehicle barriers, low water crossings so the water and wildlife can get through. It's very important for wildlife like the jaguar to be able to have access to its range. And the jaguar used to live here in the United States all the way up to the Grand Canyon. We're standing in the jaguar's historic range. The jaguar's critical habitat has been established by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it includes areas that are bisected by these walls. And that's really problematic. If we want to see a very majestic species like the jaguar, sort of a capstone species for the food pyramid, if you will, that represents a really healthy ecosystem underneath it, we're going to have to take these problems like this border wall seriously. I guess it's worth mentioning, when you see this steep hill going straight up the road, that's kind of a hallmark of the border wall, the border road, and the border barriers, is that they plow the road and they build the wall in a straight line on the border. And when that happens, you end up with a very, very steep grade dirt road. And it's basically a waterfall waiting to happen when you get a big rainstorm. There's a lot of erosion that can occur, things get washed out. Even the foundation for the walls and barriers themselves have been eroded by that kind of erosion that goes along the road down the steep slopes. A really good example of this is at Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, where at the Lukeville port of entry, if you're on your way to Rocky Point, you look off to the right if you're heading south, and there's a road just like that. It goes up a very, very steep hill, and it's so steep that Border Patrol vehicles can't even go up the hill, and they've made sort of a switchback to try to get them up there. It's intense to try to drive some of these, and this doesn't look like much, but as we walk to the top of it, you're going to see what I mean. The grade is not reasonable. The infrastructure is not going to last. It's a constant maintenance problem, and it's another reason why we're encouraging Border Patrol and Homeland Security to keep this stuff in mind as they move forward on projects. They need to do things in a way that is more sustainable. So let's go look.
It's our tax dollars too.
It is. This is public property. Well, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but this is a public right of way on the road. The roads are easy. It's a set.
If you just leave it sideways, this could be the whole big environment.
A lot of these do, and they are. These are the original markers of the U.S. Mexico border. Wow. I mean, they're not the very, very first. The first markers were piles of rocks done by the survey crew that was a binational survey crew. There's a great book called Why Walls Won't Work by a Berkeley professor, Michael Deere, and he's obsessed with these boundary monuments, and it's a really interesting book to hear the backstory. But these monuments came along later, and they put them at high points like this one, so that you could tell where the border was, because there was no other way to tell if you were in U.S. or Mexico. And the best way to do it was to have a monument, look for the next one, use your telescope or something, and just say, okay, it's about right there. Or maybe they had compasses, I don't know. And then here, the barbed wire is the original border fence. And that's what the border fence has historically looked like along the 800-mile land border. And most of the border has historically looked like the Rio Grande. So that's why we really think that the borderlands are all about water and wildlife and everything. So all this stuff is new. I don't know if you saw this piece of metal right here. It's a traffic sign that says "Keep Right." Oh! I don't know if that was a joke or what, because you really can't go left. You don't want to go too far right, that's for sure. But on this slope, if you wander down a little bit, you'll see what I mean about the it being too steep.
Yes.
I mean, it can hardly stand up over there. Someone asked what that white dot in the sky is. That's a blimp called the aerostat that's tethered to the ground. It's a Border Patrol piece of equipment that originally was designed to scan for low-flying aircraft that might be involved in smuggling. And I believe that it is now equipped with cameras that scan the ground as well, but I'm not 100% sure which aerostat has what thing attached to it. But if you drive around the border, you'll see more and more of these aerostats, these tethered white balloon things. I saw one in New Mexico just the other day on my way to Albuquerque.
Yeah, there's one in Texas too.
In Texas as well. They've come back from Iraq and they're deploying them on the border.
Okay.
That's unfortunately what's happening here is we're pulling out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're invading the southern border of the United States. And there's a lot of collateral damage associated with that. when we were back there, I stuck my hand out and I pointed at some tires. You'll see the tires, that triangle down there by the Border Patrol vehicle. That triangle is some old tires that are strapped together. These are drag tires. They drag them behind the Border Patrol vehicle, and that will smooth the road. It will make it smooth, and then they'll come back and look for footprints. And if they find footprints, they'll know that they're fresh footprints because they just smoothed out the road. So they'll know that the person is within X miles of here, and then they'll try to follow those footprints. So there's a lot of high tech and there's a lot of low tech on the border. The other thing I want to mention is the lights end. You can see where the lights stop way back there. The lights are kind of just in the, mostly confined to the urban area, but they do come out from the urban area. And the urban areas are going to be areas where wildlife try to avoid. They try to skirt those areas. So sometimes just on the outskirts of an urban area, you'll actually have more wildlife traffic. We have pretty heavily trafficked wildlife corridors. And that's why we're concerned about things like lighting being on all night in these areas. And that's why we think that this is a good project, a good area for them to install wildlife-friendly vehicle barriers at low water crossing. You also might have noticed the series of towers. I'm not seeing any obvious ones from here. Maybe that's one over there, kind of below those hills. So I don't know about that particular one, but there tend to be camera towers all along this this line that are a little bit set back. And they basically watch this whole zone with the camera towers. And it's kind of a microcosm of the Border Patrol's what they call defense in depth strategy, where they let people in to the U.S. and then use the desert as a net to try to catch these people. So they'll let people come in, they pull their defenses back, and they monitor them with cameras and whatnot, and then try to catch as many people as they can to get their apprehension numbers up and seem more effective. And so you'll hear a lot of complaints from local folks here who say, why don't you get the Border Patrol at the border and actually deter people from crossing into the United States in the first place? And I think there's some merit to that argument as well. But those are the things that I wanted to point out: the camera towers, the lights, the grade, the very intense steep grades here that we're dealing with, the historic monument, the historic border fence, and the drags, the tire drags. The tire drags, the reason I bring them up, they cause a lot of dust. They grind up this soil here where the road is so that it's not going to be possible to reclaim this area and revegetate this area. You can see there's a huge area that they've cleared there basically just to turn around. I'm sure they originally cleared it when they were constructing this wall and they had their staging area there, and now it's just this enormous turnaround where the vegetation is not going to come back because it's been ground up into a fine dust. The other thing about drags is in some areas they drag on narrow roads, and the roads become wider and wider as these tires basically swing around behind the trucks. That can make a place that has a wilderness character to it have much less of a wilderness character because the roads get wider and wider. And as one section of a road washes out or gets muddy, they might go around and form a new track over here where it's dry, and eventually you have these braided roads that go through what are supposed to be roadless wilderness areas. It's a huge problem, like I mentioned, in Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge and Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, where there are more than 10,000 miles of wildcat roads documented in these two roadless areas alone. Most of the people that are caught tend to be from Mexico, although I believe this year we had more Central Americans captured than Mexicans for the first time.
But the ones they let them get that far before they catch them. Just whoever they catch.
Yeah, whoever it is, it's crossing the border, yeah.
How's it going?
Hi there.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Very well. Hey, did you guys talk to anybody before coming up here?
We sure did.
Do you remember who it was?
Charles Strauss. And
Okay.
he's the public lands liaison for Tucson sector, and he was going to check in with the Naco station to make sure he knew we were coming.
Okay, apparently there was a lack of communication somewhere along the way.
You didn't,
Okay.
didn't get the memo?
No, we just saw a bunch of people up here, so,
Okay.
you know.
Well, I checked in with the two patrol agents stationed as we were driving in, and they said okay, so I assumed that they got it, but
Yeah, it was
maybe they
Trost was his last name?
yeah, Trost.
Okay.
He's a Tucson sector public lands liaison. He was going to come with us and talk to us, but he had to get a knee scan. He had a knee injury. He said.
Okay.
So
All right. How long do you guys plan on being up here?
we're on our way down.
Okay. Cool.
It's pretty windy.
Yeah, it is. Because this isn't the best place to mill about, honestly, because you're kind of on a high point overlooking Mexico, obviously. So, you know, there are certain dangers inherent to that. So, all right, well, very well.
All right.
Excuse me, do we, suppose I and my partner had wanted to come up here as private citizens
Uh-huh.
and hadn't contacted you?
Yeah.
Is it legal for us to drive here? Because I didn't see any particular.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that most of this is actually considered public. There are certain areas that are private, and I'm still kind of learning where that's at. I've been here just a little while, so I was on the northern border just prior to being here. So generally speaking, if it's a public road, it's a public road. Okay, but you know, just for safety's sake and you know, so that we're not diverting resources unnecessarily, it'd be helpful, you know, if we knew about it. So, which apparently you made the effort to do that, so, you know.
Yep. Not trying to make more work for you. Sorry if that's the
No,
case.
that's fine, you know. We figured, I mean, we saw the cameras and everything that you guys had, and, you know, we can kind of put two together a little bit, so.
Good.
But still, wanted to kind of, you know, make contact, see what was up.
All right. Great.
All right,
Have a good one.
you too.
Thank you.